Prison reform. President Trump meets with rapper Kanye West to discuss the criminal justice system. We're at the White House. Midterm preview. Amid fears tariffs imposed by the president may hurt rural America, we talk with a Catholic farmer in Missouri ahead of the election. On death row. New developments in the case of a Catholic woman jailed in Pakistan for violating the country's strict blasphemy laws. And celebrating a martyr. A closer look at Archbishop Oscar Romero, who will be canonized a saint on Sunday. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, October 11th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. President Trump invites an A-list celebrity to the White House. Rap artist Kanye West made a big impression in the Oval Office today. His visit also cast a spotlight on the serious topic of prison reform and giving inmates a second chance after serving time. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. I spoke with people inside and outside the White House today about prison reform. The issue brings two unlikely friends together, President Trump and Kanye West. Critics blast the singer-songwriter for taking Trump's side, but Kanye's not backing down.
You know, they tried to scare me to not wear this hat. My own friends.
Kanye West, critically acclaimed for his music, but even he admits some critics could do without his Make America Great Again hat.
You know, people expect that if you're black, you have to be Democrat.
Kanye provided an Oval Office performance in support of President Trump.
What I need the liberals to improve on is, if he don't look good, we don't look good. This is our president. He has to be the freshest, the flyest.
The White House says West, a Chicago native, joined the president to discuss the importance of manufacturing jobs and prison reform. I asked Larry Kudlow, the president's chief economic advisor, to weigh in on that topic. What role can former inmates play in building up the U.S. economy?
That's an interesting question. The answer is they could play an important role.
Kudlow is a Catholic convert. He admits to a decade's past struggle with alcohol and substance abuse.
A lot of us believe it's possible to change. A lot of us believe redemption is possible. I happen to be one of them. A lot of us believe people can be retrained and make a terrific contribution to society.
And Craig DeRoche, with the Christian-based Prison Fellowship, tells me Jesus commands us to serve those who are serving time.
Jesus Christ, on earth, told disciples when they said, what do we need to do? He's very specific, about clothing people that needed clothes, feeding people that needed food, shelter. And I think Christians know how to do that. But Jesus was also clear that people needed to visit the prisoner.
Although prison reform was a topic of discussion here at the White House today, Kanye West in the Oval Office really grabbed all the attention. He spoke for over 10 minutes, sometimes ranting, cursing. He brought up his diagnosis with bipolar disorder. It all ended with a hug. He said he loves the president. Wyatt?
And Mark, even though the alliance between President Trump and Kanye West is strong, do they disagree?
They do. The rapper also spoke against stop and frisk policing policies, which Trump recently expressed support for. The president did say he was open to other ideas on that issue, though, Wyatt.
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. In 2016, voters in rural areas overwhelmingly supported candidate Trump. As 2018 elections approaches, the president's administration has imposed trade tariffs on China, and they're costing a lot of money for some of the same voters. Correspondent Jason Calvi met one Catholic farmer affected by the tariffs.
Wyatt, hello from the battleground state of Missouri, where Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill is defending her seat against Republican challenger Josh Hawley. The number one crop in the state is this one, soybeans, but it's taken a big hit in the trade fight with China. I met one Catholic soybean farmer who's still undecided about his vote. In Mexico, Missouri, Catholic farmer Thad Becker shows us his 65 acres of soybeans.
A big portion of our soybean crop is exported and shipped on the global market, and China is our biggest customer, or at least was our biggest customer.
President Trump and China are waging a trade war. China slapped a 25% tariff on American soybeans. That sunk profits. And it means a few dollars less per bushel for this Catholic farmer.
Probably China has done some things in the past that haven't necessarily played fair with us. So, it means sacrifice to us as a family. And so I want that sacrifice to mean something, obviously. And so make it worth our while, I guess, would be my message to President Trump on that. There's been lots of people sacrificed for this country. I'm willing to sacrifice too.
Thad's weighing his midterm vote for Missouri's next senator. He says Trump's tariffs won't sway him, and he thinks other farmers won't use it as a reason to vote against their president and his party.
It's kind of amazing all that we do with them.
He says he won't break even on soybeans this year, but farmers will weather the financial storm.
Prices will come back. I have no doubt about it, and we'll have some sacrifice this year. There'll be a little belt tightening and that, but we'll survive.
Thad tells me he hopes this spat with China will lead to a better trade relationship and a better future for his family.
Good to see you.
His wife, Keller, and their two boys, Gus and Hank. But today, he's got to get ready for this year's harvest. Every vote really will matter here in Missouri, where there's a dead heat between Democrat McCaskill and Republican Halley. Now, McCaskill is blasting Trump's tariffs, while Halley says the president had the right to try to put pressure on China to get a better deal for farmers here in Missouri and across the country. Looking at our EWTN poll of Catholics across the country, here in the Midwest, we find that the most important issue for Catholics is health care. The second most important issue for Catholics here in the Midwest is the economy and jobs. Wyatt?
Correspondent Jason Calvi reporting in Missouri. Thanks, Jason. At least 2 people are dead after Hurricane Michael strikes Florida and Georgia. This drone footage shows the devastation left in Mexico Beach, Florida. That's where the top winds hit 155 miles per hour. Thousands of National Guard troops, law enforcement officers, and medical teams are working their way into damaged communities to search for survivors. Michael was the 3rd most powerful front ever to pound the U.S. mainland. Now downgraded to a tropical storm, Michael is headed toward the Carolinas. A man in Wisconsin is sentenced to 22 years in prison for trying to force an abortion on his pregnant girlfriend. The man spiked her drink with an abortion-inducing drug. His girlfriend never drank the concoction, but miscarried several weeks later. Planned Parenthood launches a new political campaign aimed at fighting the pro-life movement. The announcement comes just days after Justice Brett Kavanaugh, a lifelong Catholic, joined the Supreme Court. The nation's largest abortion provider is targeting Illinois with pro-abortion messages. The group says that state is critical in their wider Midwest campaign. All 15 Catholic dioceses in Texas will release the names of clergy credibly accused of sexual abuse. The list will be made public early next year. The state's bishop says being transparent will start the healing process and may eventually restore trust in the church. Cardinal Sean O'Malley of Boston says he is concerned about how the Bishop of Buffalo has handled allegations of clergy abuse, and he's asking the Vatican to investigate. Bishop Richard Malone is facing calls to resign. A probe found he allowed multiple priests accused of misconduct to return to ministry. Jim Toohey says he will step down as president of Ave Maria University when his contract ends in 2020. The Naples, Florida school says it will begin a national search for a replacement this summer. Toohey has been president for 7 years. A school official praised his leadership and accomplishments, but Toohey was criticized by alumni last month for his public defense of Pope Francis following a letter alleging the Holy Father concealed clergy abuse. A South Korean bishop says a visit by Pope Francis to North Korea would be a gigantic step for peace on the peninsula, but he says we're a long way off before that can happen. Bishop Lazarus Yu Hung-sik told Vatican reporters today they need to see some concrete changes. He says North Korea is an atheist country that does not allow priests or allow people of faith to freely worship. Next week, South Korean President Moon Jae-in will meet with Pope Francis and is expected to relay an invitation from North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Preparation is underway at the Vatican for the canonization of 7 new saints this Sunday. One of them is Archbishop Oscar Romero, a martyr from El Salvador. Our Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley joins us with a preview. Juliet?
Wyatt, we heard today from Cardinal Gregorio Chavez, Auxiliary Bishop of San Salvador, and he described Romero as the saint of 4 popes. Paul VI, who also becomes a saint on Sunday, Cardinal Chavez says Romero was a great admirer of his. Pope John Paul II declared that Romero should be a saint, and Pope Benedict subsequently called him a witness for the faith. And Chavez told journalists today that as a cardinal, Pope Francis said that were he to become pope, he would canonize him. And that is exactly what will be happening on Sunday, Wyatt, with some 70,000 faithful expected to attend. One final note, Cardinal Chavez said that on Monday, bishops from El Salvador are scheduled to meet the Holy Father, and he expects it to be confirmed that Francis will visit the country during his trip to Panama for World Youth Day this coming January. Wyatt?
Thanks, Juliet. We'll check back with you a little bit later for more in-depth story on the life of Oscar Romero. EWTN will broadcast the canonization Mass live Sunday morning at 3:30 a.m. Eastern Time with encore programs at noon Eastern in English and 4 p.m. Eastern in Spanish. There are growing calls for a Jesuit priest living in the UK to be extradited back to his native South Africa. This after accusations Father William McCurtain sexually abused a teenager in the 1980s. The BBC reports the 84-year-old acknowledges causing the teen great pain, but he did not comment on the extradition request. McCurtain was removed from ministry in 2001 when the Jesuits were informed of the allegations. An extremist party in Pakistan is demanding the country's Supreme Court uphold the death sentence for a Catholic woman convicted of blasphemy. Asia Bibi made her final appeal earlier this week. Her lawyer says she was falsely accused. Pakistan's highest court postponed its ruling. The extremist party says if the 3-judge panel frees Bibi, they will, quote, face consequences. A court in Egypt sentences 17 Islamic militants to death for their involvement in attacks against Christians. The court also sentenced another 19 to life in prison. Prosecutors noted several deadly strikes on churches. Christians make up about 10% of Egypt's population. The leader of the Knights of Columbus met this week with the president of Poland. Carl Anderson and President Andrzej Duda discussed the legacy of Pope John Paul II, plus the growing presence of the Knights in the majority Catholic country. Since its founding in the region 12 years ago, the group has contributed more than $1.6 million to charity. The Knights of Columbus are a sponsor of EWTN News Nightly. There is plenty more to come on EWTN News Nightly. Coming up, President Trump weighs in on the missing Saudi Arabian journalist. Some fear he may have been murdered. Plus, we hear from a religious freedom advocate who attended a historic meeting between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. President Trump says the United States is helping in the investigation of a missing Saudi journalist who disappeared in Turkey. Jamal Khashoggi was critical of Saudi Arabia's government in columns he wrote for the Washington Post. He disappeared 1 week ago from the country's consulate in Istanbul. Saudi officials deny any involvement in the writer's disappearance. Turkish officials say they feared he was murdered. The president says he wants to find out what happened. Earlier this month, Saudi Arabia's religious police met with a delegation from the United States for the first time ever. Our next guest is a religious freedom advocate who took part in the meeting. Joining me now for an update is Johnnie Moore, Commissioner with the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. Johnnie, welcome back to the program.
It's good to be back.
There's a lot of focus on Saudi Arabia and the government, obviously, with the missing Saudi journalist. You visited Saudi Arabia recently in the end of September. What were your impressions in talking with the Saudi government, and why do you think they were so much more open to talking with you, a religious freedom advocate?
Well, look, I mean, there's a trend in the region where when it comes to general freedom of speech and freedom of conscience, there's a decline, a rise in totalitarianism. But on the other side of the coin, when it comes to religious tolerance and peaceful coexistence and even religious freedom, the peer pressure is in the opposite direction. It's actually moving in a positive direction. And there are plenty of things that we're looking into. We haven't drawn all of our conclusions yet. But this particular meeting that you mentioned was a historic first. For the first time ever, a U.S. delegation met with the religious police that have been taken off the streets, their batons taken away. They can no longer interrupt private worship services, no longer go into the sanctity of someone's home. It's a sign that maybe it's possible to have religious freedom in Saudi Arabia. That's, to my surprise, I left saying to myself, this could actually happen, despite all the other complexities that we're well aware of.
Saudi Arabia, of course, is still labeled a country of particular concern for more than 10 years because of religious freedom violations. Just give me an overview. What are some of those violations, and what is the progress trying to be done to stop them?
Well, listen, when you talk about religious freedom, you talk about a few things. The ability to worship publicly and privately. You know, that's at the very heart of it. And the ability to convert, to change your beliefs about something without repercussions. So when you boil it down to a very simple perspective, these are the types of things that we're looking for. And it's true. I mean, you know, on the peninsula, there still isn't a church in all of Saudi Arabia, not one church. And yet, when I sat down with the Minister of Islamic Affairs and I said, you know, I asked him the question, could there be another religion on the peninsula? Because in every single meeting before with the Ministry of Islamic Affairs, by any USERF delegation, the answer's always been the same. The Hadith says there can be only one religion on the peninsula. This Minister of Islamic Affairs said something different. He got fire in his eyes. He said, that is a wrong interpretation of the Hadith. And he explained how they have this project to fix these bad interpretations of the Hadith. And I'm sitting there thinking, wow.
Didn't think this was ever going to be possible.
I didn't think I was going to hear this out of someone like this. So, you know, we have to be cautiously optimistic, our eyes wide open. A lot of work needs to be done, but there's a glimmer of light.
You alluded to earlier the fact that human rights are connected to religious freedom rights and social reforms, for example. So, for example, lifting the ban on women drivers, how do you think that sort of impacts religious reform?
Well, it makes everything else easier. And by the way, when the population doesn't respond in a negative way, it makes these other potentially more controversial religious reforms easier. And so not only are women driving and not wearing veils, I actually sat in a meeting with a young woman who wasn't veiled that disagreed with the man in the ministry leading the meeting, and she had an open discussion and argument with him. That would not have happened not long ago. So, you know, again, despite everything else going on, we need to positively reinforce the good changes, and they're real, and they're effective, and they're coming, and yet we can't let them off the hook in these other areas.
Very good. Well, like I say, it's a subject we're going to continue to follow. I know you guys will continue to talk with your counterparts over there. Johnnie Moore, Commissioner with the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
There's a lot more to come on our newscast. Up next, why Pope Francis says prayer is not like a magic wand. Plus, a closer look at Archbishop Oscar Romero ahead of his canonization Sunday. On this day in 1962, Pope John XXIII oversaw the start of Vatican II. The council focused on the Church's relationship with the modern world, and it implemented a number of reforms. Attendees included the future popes John Paul I, John Paul II, and Benedict XVI. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Pope Francis tells the faithful never to grow tired of prayer. At his daily Mass at the Vatican, the Holy Father says God is our friend and wants to give us what we need, but praying is not a magic wand. Instead, it requires effort. Two bishops from China continue to make history at the Vatican as they participate in a meeting of bishops known as a synod. Here's a picture of the bishops as they visited our EWTN Rome Bureau. They were invited to attend the synod by Pope Francis as part of a breakthrough deal between the Vatican and Beijing over bishop nominations. It's the first time that bishops from mainland China have participated in a synod. Joining me now to talk more about that deal is Nina Shea, Director of the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute. Nina, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Great to be here.
What do you make of this new chapter between the Vatican and China?
Well, actually, I'm not as optimistic as some of the others in Rome. And I think the best thing about the deal is that it's provisional. So there's a chance that it could possibly get better. But I don't see that on the horizon right now. I'm very worried because the Pope has talked about a unified church, that he hopes that that will achieve a unified church, this deal. And I'm more with former Cardinal Zen, that it's actually a bigger birdcage that everybody is being put into, that the underground church will be forced into this new government structure. The Pope hopes to be able to appoint, in fact, he told American Magazine today, the Jesuit magazine, that Rome is going to appoint the bishops, that the Pope will appoint the bishops. Now, this is quite different than what we heard before, that he only gets a veto, and that the appointments will be done by the Chinese government, Communist Party, actually. So these are, and then there was no concessions for the disappeared and imprisoned priests and bishops. Bishop Su disappeared in the late 90s, has not been seen since. Why didn't they ask for information for him?
So there's a lot there that's still on the table. The director of the Holy See Press Office, Greg Burke, says, quote, the objective of the accord is not political, but pastoral. So I guess Is there some good that comes out of this?
Well, you know, they talk about this recognizes the Pope as the head of the Roman Catholic Church. I see it as more a figurehead. For the large part, the magisterium of the Church, the teachings of this Pope and the prior popes, will not, a large part of them will not be able to be taught. The abortion, religious freedom, even the ones that this Pope has done so much to elevate, which is banning capital punishment or the environment, there will not be able to be any teaching or evangelizing on these issues.
And like you say, the Vatican can come in with good intentions, but the Chinese government may not have the same intentions.
Exactly.
So then, is there any steps in the right direction then trying to allow more religious freedom in China? Because that continues to be a problem as well, just simply being able to worship.
Yes, there has been worship allowed up until now, and there are patriotic churches that have bishops that have been recognized. The majority were recognized, 110 or so out of 115 recognized by both parties, by both the Vatican and by the Pope and the Beijing. So I really don't understand how this is going to get better, but this is a very dark moment for China. There are 1 million Muslims in concentration camps, in brainwashing camps, in a large network throughout China. So this is a very dark time. I don't see a liberalization happening anytime soon. I worry that the church is going to be used for spying on Catholics. It's going to be, and who would go to confession if you're going to get a bad social credit score, which they're giving individuals now in China on behavior.
And like I say, the key seems to be the Chinese Communist government wants that control of the bishops, control of its citizens.
They want control, and they want to have a soft power prize like the Holy See.
Okay, very good. Well, so many things that I know our viewers are going to be praying about, and you'll continue to shine the spotlight on. Nina Shea, Director of the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute, thanks so much for your analysis.
Thank you.
Finally tonight, Catholics from El Salvador are looking forward to Archbishop Oscar Romero being canonized a saint on Sunday. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley gives us a look at his life and legacy.
Oscar Romero was named Archbishop of San Salvador in 1977. He was known for organizing peaceful protests against the violent military dictatorship. As poverty and political turmoil grew, Romero began openly criticizing the arrests, torture and even murders of clergy and lay people at the hands of the government. Romero became a champion of the poor and encouraged people to offer their suffering to Jesus Christ.
The preaching of Romero is really a great example. Romero loved rich people and loved poor people. He wanted to unite them, not to divide.
On March 24, 1980, Romero was gunned down while saying Mass in a hospital chapel. His outspokenness against the government had earned him many enemies. But the murder stunned the country, and 250,000 people attended his funeral.
Romero was killed because he applied a church in dialogue with all people, starting from the poor people. This is the point. Romero is not a politician. Romero is a pastor. He wanted to save or to help all Salvadorian people.
Romero's unwillingness to accept social injustice led to his martyrdom. In February 2015, Pope Francis declared Romero a martyr for the faith. He was beatified 2 months later in San Salvador, and now, nearly 3.5 years on, one of Latin America's most beloved figures is becoming a saint. At the Vatican, Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks, Juliet, for that story. As we mentioned, EWTN will air the canonization Mass this Sunday. That wraps up our newscast for tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Thank you for watching. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.